Welcome back to the show. Well, from winter to spring we turn our attention to, but we are not talking about the seasons. We are talking, of course, about the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring is now 3 years old. The series of protests and uprisings in the Middle East that began in Tunisia in 2010 has brought down regimes in 10 Arab nations, sparked mass violence in others, while governments are trying to manage the trouble with a mix of repression and promise of reform. Here's more on that story.
Tens of thousands attended a rally in the Yemeni capital last week to mark the anniversary of the 2011 popular uprising that led to the departure of President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Yemen's uprising began in February 2011 and was largely inspired by the Arab Spring protests that toppled the leaders of Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya. One protester called on current President Hadi to disarm militia groups in the country. The protesters chanted anti-government slogans as they marched from Tahrir Square to government headquarters. Yemen has been grappling with violence and lawlessness since Saleh's ouster. Other Gulf Arab monarchies have forestalled serious Arab Spring unrest through crackdowns on opposition Islamists and lavish handouts from huge oil revenues to potentially restive sections of the population, especially the young and unemployed. Uprisings against entrenched autocracies elsewhere in the Arab world since 2011 have toppled 4 heads of state, while Syria has been shattered by an almost 3-year-old civil war.
And we also want to mention that a bomb blast in Bahrain killed a police officer over the weekend. Now, to talk more about the Arab Spring, our panel of Dee Dee Benkie, Jackie Guzda, and Dr. Bart Rossi from sunny Florida continue our discussions. And certainly this has been something that we have talked about. We have discussed it on this show over and over again. But when we look at the magnitude of this, did you ever think that you would ever see something like this?
Absolutely not. I mean, it's been such a change. If we look at where it started in Tahrir Square in Egypt, Mubarak was the dictator there for 30 long years. And these people lived under his rule. Things weren't very good for the lower 50% of them. They were living in poverty. So to see the young people start this big uprising, which then spread all over the Middle East, is just amazing. I commend those people for it. You know, it hasn't been easy for them.
Well, I commend, I'm not sure if that's the word. Dee Dee, your thoughts on the word commend?
Well, I have to tell you that I think a lot of this, and I do think there is a good point about the young people, because that's who it is. They're like, look, we like the Western way of the world. I mean, I really think that in the Middle East, young people, because of social media, and because there's so much more attention, and because you've got those flash mobs, I think because of technology, things have changed and they do not want to take it anymore, more than it's ever been in the past. So, which is fascinating. As far as I commend, I don't know about that, but I do think that they are aware and they don't want things as they've been. And they see where people in other countries have it better, more so than any other time.
I want to check in with Dr. Bart for a second. Because of social media, we are able to talk to Dr. Bart. We miss him in the studio, of course, but glad to have you via Skype. Dr. Bart, do you think we would be seeing these uprisings if it wasn't for technology, to Dee Dee's point?
I don't think so. I think it's a new world. It's a new era. You know, we've talked on the show about everybody under 40 years old and the change it's having on society. I don't think we'd see all of this without social media. And I think, you know, the quest for freedom brings in a lot of conflicts and a lot of issues. And that's why this is such a dramatic story to discuss, because, you know, you have these kids and young folks who want freedom, but they're not really sure what that's all about. And how do you get there?
And I think that's a great point. They're not really sure exactly what they want, but in terms of many of the countries, say like Egypt, because that was such a huge tourist attraction, the country now has lost billions of dollars because of that. So the protests have actually done a great deal of damage as well as the enormous loss of life.
Well, damage to who? Damage to the tourists coming over, damage to the multinational companies that operate over there. We're talking about a protest from the people who actually live there day to day. If they don't like living under a dictatorship anymore, They had the guts to get out there, and that's why I commend them to overthrow it. Now, things didn't work out to their advantage. You know why? Because the system over there was rigged. They put somebody in, Morsi, who is kind of a carbon copy, although he gave a different face.
But that's
to the
just
Mubarak
one country
regime.
also.
That's one country.
Each country is
Look,
different.
And those kids inspired the youth of the other countries around there. Right now, in my college classrooms, I'm trying to use those kids to inspire the ones I have now, because they're kind of here in America in a lull. They don't watch the news.
Well,
they don't support
Wall
the
Street
government.
movement as well.
We did that. But what I see in the college classroom day to day is they think they don't have power to change anything.
That's interesting, and that goes to the voting. But Dee Dee,
Well, yeah, throughout history, you've got evolution and revolution. Revolution is when it's by force, when you have death, when you have, turmoil. Where evolution is like, okay, you try to talk it through, you also have some force, and I think that this evolution with the young people, I think they're actually going about it the right way, as long as it doesn't get whenever you have too much turmoil and people are dying, because it is very difficult right now in all the Middle Eastern countries. When it gets to be where there's at a fever pitch, it gets to be dangerous.
And of course, one of the countries that has one of the highest death rates right now is, of course, Syria. That has slid into civil war as a result of the Arab Spring. Now, the multi-religious country allied to Iran and ruled by a repressive regime remains a pivotal country. Most of the Alawite religious minority side with President Bashar al-Assad, and most of the Sunni majority support the rebels. Both camps have outside backers, with Russia supporting the regime and Saudi Arabia supporting the rebels. The grim facts are this, ladies: 130,000 people are dead and millions more are homeless.
Syrian refugees have fled to Lebanon since the Syrian army attacked Yabrud earlier this week. Yabrud is the last rebel stronghold in Syria's mountainous Kala region. Backed by Lebanon's Hezbollah fighters, the army has been on the offensive since December.
I was going to the bakery to get what we need. We do this every day to get bread and food, and a shell landed on me and my friend.
As the refugees in Lebanon search for fuel and blankets, there is a second round of peace talks in Geneva. Despite the escalating violence in Syria, delegates in Switzerland have not agreed on an agenda. The regime will not accept a transition without President Assad, while the opposition will not tolerate his presence. The civil war that began in March 2011 has killed over 130,000 Syrians and displaced over 2.5 million people.
And of course, as we've discussed, that 130,000 is a number that is used, but we don't know if that could be, in fact, much, much more. The refugees, that to me is such a hardship and heartbreaking to see the children being turned away from many of these camps. Dr. Bart, when we see a country that's just in ruin like Syria, how do they ever get back to any kind of normalcy even if they move into a refugee camp, if they go to Turkey, if they go to Lebanon? I mean, I've worked with a lot of survivors of natural disasters, but this is just so grim.
Yeah, when I hear a story like this, I think of two things: the short term, then the longer term. In the short term, of course, it's just basic survival, because in the longer run, I think what's going to happen is politics and the way the country goes, the way that the movement of the country kind of take care of itself in terms of hopefully getting better to some degree. So I think it's really a psychological or emotional issue, especially when it comes to kids, but then it's also a political issue on top of that. So I think of the short run and the long term on this whole thing.
And of course, we just saw some of the talks breaking down. Do you have any hope for Syria right now? I know there was a slight glimmer of hope, if you will, but Dee Dee?
Well, no, I mean, just an utter fail of the UN. And Brahimi said, oh, I'm sorry nothing worked out. I think that's ridiculous. I don't know what the UN is doing. I really think that they should step up and really push this. I mean, for one time, could they get something right? So it's really very disappointing because these people are dying. They're being butchered. It's terrible. So yeah, this is a humanitarian crisis. This is well past what we're talking about in the other countries.
Yeah, this is one of the greatest humanitarian crises that they're calling it.
Sure. They're saying that the refugees now are going to different countries, to refugee camps, and they're being pushed aside.
Pushed aside, yeah.
Yeah. No, this is a horrible, disgusting humanitarian crisis. But I think we've got to keep the door open to communication and diplomacy, because nothing is ever going to happen if we don't. Yeah, the first time around, we didn't bring peace to the Middle East, especially to a country that is undergoing a civil war. However, we've got to keep trying. It's such a monumental task.
I think that's the only way that we can ever resolve the conflict there is by keeping the talks open. So we will continue to follow this story for many weeks and I'm sure months to come. Well, we are going to continue our talk from overseas. Off to Sochi we go, where we will talk about a big win for the U.S. hockey team and other highlights. We'll be right back.